But first, let's go to my first guest, political and social commentator, a regular at this point on a Sunday afternoon. A warm welcome to James Melville. Hi, James.
Hi, Kevin. Are you well?
I'm very well, but a lot of pressing problems to discuss, I think. I want to ask you, I'm going to cover the story in a little while. This story of a place called Stradey Park Hotel. It's in Llanelli in Wales. It's a four-star hotel. It's got copper baths in its suites. It's got immaculate manicured gardens. It's a renowned wedding venue, a favourite dining spot, fine dining spot. They're basically going to pack this hotel with asylum seekers. I covered that story a couple of weeks ago, saying this is what's going on. Don't let Rishi tell you that he's finding other places other than hotels to put migrants, because he's not. He's finding some places, but hotels are still being commandeered all over the country. Anyway, 2 weeks later, or a week or so later, what do we learn? That nearly 100 staff, the staff of this hotel, are all being made redundant so that the new runners of the hotel can move in cheap staff to keep the costs at a bare minimum. Now, this is ripping the heart out of a local community. They're proud of this hotel. You know, it's where they go for their functions, their civic functions. It's a great-looking hotel, beautiful place. They're proud of their hotel. That's gone. And now 100 people from the local community who work there, not a massive community, 100 people who work there have all lost their jobs. This is happening all over the country. This is outrageous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real concern. I think more and more people are concerned by this. And also, I'd want to point out, I think the majority of people in the country support the benefits of a lot of immigration throughout historical context and now, but they do not support what is happening in terms of government not getting on top of this issue. It's happening in communities all around the country, and people are getting angry. We're in a cost of living crisis as well. It feels like the government aren't on top of the real concerns facing communities around this country. And actually, it's important for people to express concern about this and not be accused of being xenophobic, because they're not. They're worried. I'm sick of that side of the debate. It's just not true. It's framing it in the wrong way. What's happening is that communities are concerned what is happening to their infrastructures, their jobs, their schools, their public services. It's not just immigration. It's a number of different issues. But when you see stories like this, and they are happening across the country, people are looking at our government and thinking, well, where is the solution on this? This problem isn't just going to go away, but the government are making the problem worse. They're coming up with crass logic solutions. And so therefore the problem's getting worse, and there's more and more resentment in communities. And so this problem's been going on and on and on. We've been talking about this for a very long time, Kevin, and the government are not putting any legacy solutions in on the immigration situation. And communities, quite often, communities that are struggling to make ends meet at the moment, from an ongoing cost of living crisis, with a government that's not getting on top of the cost of living crisis, when people are struggling to put food on the table, hold down their jobs, deal with crumbling infrastructures of public services, and on top of it, we've got this story. So therefore, it's completely understandable why communities are concerned about this.
Yes. And, of course, this week at the courts, the Rwanda scheme was squashed rather predictably by the usual left-wing liberal virtue-signalling judges. So Rishi doesn't have that up his sleeve anymore as a deterrent. Possibly they'll appeal that decision, but it's not a goer at the moment. So the process of commandeering accommodation centres for migrants continues apace all over the country. Now, what the people of Llanelli and their representative of other communities all over the country are saying is you're prioritising finding somewhere for these migrants to live over the health of our community, over the prosperity of our community. We love our local hotel. 100 people work there. You've just said, no, they can go, and that's no longer a hotel, it's a migrant centre. And these people, their protests are not being listened to because the government, in the process of getting these hotels and, of course, disused air bases and all of that, is using emergency powers it gave itself during the COVID crisis. And what that means is the government completely can completely override all consultation with the local community, which normally by law they'd have to engage in. So that's what's happening here. This is people's lives are being trampled on, roughshod by a government that can't do anything else in terms of these migrants except find them places to stay at terrible cost.
Yeah, we're having government policy by decree. You know, there's nothing democratic about this as well. No one voted for this at the last election. I don't remember it being on any manifesto, like many, many other policies we've had for different reasons over the last few years. And I think the government will pay a hefty price for this at the general election next year, because they're forgetting a lot of the issues that are happening in many communities around the country. This is one issue, the hotels, but there's many, many other issues as well. The government aren't listening to communities. And we're having communities that are struggling through a cost of living crisis, wondering why the government's putting crass logic solutions to major issues, this being one of many. There's many other issues we talk about. We could have a whole debate about net zero solutions as well, which most people in the country see as inconvenient and they didn't vote for. But people are tired of this. They're tired of a government and also an opposition who seem completely out of tune with the real concerns and issues that are happening in communities around the country. I see it down in Cornwall. I live in Cornwall. I go up to Scotland a lot because I have to see elderly family up there. I see it in communities, same issues on a lot of times, but there's also other issues. But fundamentally, what's connecting all the issues is a sense of decline, a sense of disenfranchisement.
Yeah.
Communities feeling that their politicians, not just big government, but also local government as well, putting in place a lot of measures that are either undemocratic or not in keeping with the real concerns of communities. And I think the tragedy with this is so many millions of people feel that they're not being listened to by whatever level of politician right now.
That's exactly right. People are screaming. They're screaming, stop the boats, do something about these migrants, stop commandeering hotels in the middle of our community. In Skegness, there are 6 hotels all the way down the beach, all the way down the seafront. They're tourist hotels. They're now full of migrants. Skegness can't make money out of the tourist trade because they've been overridden by this. Also, as you quite rightly say, last week they stuck another 170 quid green levy onto our energy bills. And we're all screaming, we don't want you to do this. Why are you imposing this on us? And they don't seem to hear us. They don't seem to listen. They're completely out of touch, which actually brings me on to our next topic. Talking of out of touch, Macron, the president of France. People in France always say, no matter how loud they scream, he doesn't listen. He doesn't listen to them. What do you think is going on in France right now? And by the way, it's just spread to Belgium. You know, Paris is burning. People are rioting. Obviously, the trigger was this poor little kid getting shot by a copper, but it's given rise to something that is a lot more than that. And we're even hearing that military leaders are saying to Macron, unless you get a grip on this, unless you squash these riots, unless you stop them, we'll move in and do it ourselves. That's how a tinderbox situation France finds itself in. But Macron, he's like Sunak. He cannot open his ears to the people. He doesn't seem to understand them.
Yeah, I'm completely out of touch. So gilded existence. I mean, there was, the straw that broke the camel's back in a lot of ways with this. There's always something that kicks off a protest and a riot. But France has been bubbling away on a number of different issues for a number of years now. It feels that, for instance, government aren't listening to them or voting through things or shoving through bits of legislation that aren't in keeping, again, with what the French people want. They've got similar problems. There's a cost of living crisis. It feels like haves and have-nots. In the UK, in France, in many parts across Europe, where it feels that we've got our gilded elites who are not serving the people, they're serving themselves and enforcing decrees that they think is best. But the people are saying, no, it's not. Yeah. It's not best for us. You need to start listening to the people. So what's happening with the protests on a number of different issues is that it's people power. People power have had enough, but there's always a flashpoint that causes a protest to go into wider civil unrest. And that's what's happening here. It's happening across Europe. But it's nothing new here, that, Kevin, this has been obviously going on in France in a number of different shapes and forms for quite a long time now. But at the heart of this matter is you have a leader, a president in France, who seems, like many of our leaders, to be more concerned with clinking glasses at things like G7 and G20 and COP conferences, with mixing with other elites, and sort of almost sneering at their own people. And I think we've gone through a bit of period where there is a sort of apathy with a lot of voters with our leaders, but I think it's beginning to turn. When you have a cost of living crisis, an economic crisis that goes on for month after month after month, eventually people snap because they've had enough with just making do and struggling to keep their heads above water. And the reason for the fact that there's a cost of living crisis is because the individuals who are in charge, who are telling everyone else how to do something, how to behave, are not listening and not providing effective policies. And eventually, history's taught us this before, eventually you end up with protests and civil unrest. And I think it's a combination of issues that have come together and created almost a perfect storm in France right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, both France and Britain, we're being led by these kind of globalist technocrats.
Yeah.
Who, as you quite rightly say, James, they want to listen to each other. They want to gather at G7 conferences and wear matching Hawaiian shirts and that sort of thing. And they're not listening to us. They're not listening to the people. And as Macron is finding out, that can be your downfall. And Rishi better be careful as well. He's just not listening to us. He's just not listening. Let's move on. I want to talk about Nigel Farage. I think we've got Nigel here talking about his bank account. Have we got that ready? Yeah? No?
I got a phone call a couple of months ago to say, we are closing your accounts. I asked why. No reason was given. I was told a letter would come which would explain everything. The letter came through and simply said, we are closing your accounts. We want to finish it all by a date, which is around about now.
So Nigel Farage is not the only one. Other people have talked of this syndrome where banks, commercial institutions, building societies are closing down customers' accounts because they don't like their politics. Nigel Farage is rather famously right-wing. A vicar, a retired vicar, told This Week he wrote to the Yorkshire Building Society to ask why every single office of theirs was festooned with pride regalia. He didn't agree with that, but he apparently wrote a polite letter asking why they were doing this, devoting their office space to promoting pride. They wrote back and said, your account's cancelled, and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of commercial cancel culture that is very sinister, very worrying, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's like a slippery slope to almost freedom of speech, social credit systems. We're surely better than that in this country. One of the sort of pillars of being in Britain is about to be a liberal, free society. That includes freedom of speech. There's many issues that I would disagree with Nigel Farage on, but I sympathise with him on this. We've all got different opinions, and who's going to play God from a commercial point of view about what opinions allow us to have things like bank accounts? I mean, that's the sort of stuff. It's like a whiff of authoritarianism out of China. We shouldn't be doing this. I think the government need to step in here. They need to make sure that basically people's opinions are not shut down on a commercial context. They shouldn't be deplatformed from a bank or retailer, whoever it might be. There's been others that this has happened to recently. Toby Young went through something obviously with PayPal. So this has to be nipped in the bud now, because if it's not, then it's a slippery slope to a cancel culture form of a social credit system based on opinions. And who gets to judge what opinion is right? The commercial organisation? Really? We should be nowhere near having this sort of discussion. And it's up to the government, legislation, to make sure that this sort of thing does not happen. With freedom of speech, there's freedom of consequences. If people don't agree with that speech, they can argue and debate that. Yeah. But we shouldn't be getting into a pattern whereby banks are deciding who has an account with them purely because of someone's opinion or opinions. That is completely wrong.
James, still with this banking business, the closing down of accounts for political reasons, you alluded earlier to the fact that the government ought to do something about this. At the very least, I think that banks, commercial institutions, building societies, if they shut your account down or my account down, what they're doing now, they're writing to people like Nigel Farage and literally just saying, as of July the 16th, we're closing down your account. That's it. They don't give them any reasons. So I would suggest that at the very least, the government should put in place a system where banks and building societies, financial institutions have to give the reasons why they're closing an account.
Yeah, completely. There has to be transparency. This is a major thing. It's people's financial transactions. But there is a whiff, again, of a form of a social credit system creeping in here. Who gets to judge opinions? But I agree with your point, Kevin. I think there has to be more transparency and give thorough reasons about why this is happening. But if it's just based on opinions, that isn't good enough. It just isn't for me. That's not a liberal society. That's, again, like something that would happen out in China. We don't want to be going down that route, because once we open the doors to this, more and more things happen. And then there's more and more examples that people are getting judged in a commercial context because of opinions. We've been through this sort of pattern before, actually, through the COVID era, with vaccine passports.
Yeah.
People were getting judged on medical procedures. You know, it's extraordinary that we actually came to that. And anyone who's standing up against that, which is one of the most grotesquely illiberal things seen in this country, they were smeared as anti-vaxxers. This is the othering that is creeping in to society everywhere, purely because of judgment calls, medical decisions, bodily autonomy issues, and also now opinions. This has to be stopped, because if it isn't, it's going to creep into other aspects of society. And before we know it, it will be too late. And I would suggest that this country should never, ever go down that path. That's not what we stand for in this country.
I totally agree. And again, this is exactly the sort of issue where the government, our government, these Tories, will just stand by, asleep at the wheel, and let it carry on. They really should take a stand on some of these issues. We're talking about basic freedoms in what's supposed to be a free country. And we cannot have banks closing down the accounts of customers because they don't like the customers' opinions. That's, as you rightly say, that's the sort of thing that happens in North Korea. So action, please, Sunak, as soon as possible. Before you go, a bit of a woke dilemma. I mean, who would you support in this confrontation, James? I'm talking about Just Stop Oil. And yesterday was the Pride March or the Pride celebrations. Big procession coming down, trucks and things everywhere, great fun. And Just Stop Oil suddenly disrupted the procession and stopped them because one of their sponsors, the Pride celebration sponsors, is United Airlines. And of course, United Airlines are an airline, and therefore they're not very good for the environment. So who would you support out of these two? There they go. This is the Pride truck being stopped by Just Stop Oil. Woke meets woke. Who would you go for, James?
I would absolutely support Pride. I have seen friends of mine who've actually been given a lot of help and support by Pride over the years, gay friends of mine. I think a lot of their marches are galvanising people. What they're doing is within their rights to do what they're doing. A peaceful, effectively festival. I've got no time for Just Stop Oil. None whatsoever. I think they're a slightly shady joke organisation that are riddled full of contradictions and been disruptive for quite some time. So I would support Pride on this one, because I'm all for the freedom of expression. And what Just Stop Oil are doing is disrupting that. Well, with actually a set of arguments that if you want to pick apart, they wouldn't have much argument left.
No. Yeah, it's just an interesting moment, isn't it, where they both sides of this argument clash. But Just Stop Oil will just do anything to make headlines. It is virtue signalling. It is pointless. And, you know, as you quite rightly say, Pride do a lot of good work, and they should not be disrupted like this, just like no one should be disrupted like this. The road blocking, where are the cops? Arrest them. What are they doing?
Well, I mean, it's just ridiculous what they're doing. The orange spraying, you know, cricket matches and snooker tables, whatever. I mean, I'm slightly concerned that this is then interlinked in terms of, you know, the government putting attempts to stop as many protests as possible, the police deciding that. And I think it gives almost a fuel to the argument for the government to do that because of Just Stop Oil. So there's that sort of that element to it. The government end up framing it for their own means. But the Just Stop Oil argument is ludicrous because their disruption sometimes paradoxically causes more traffic congestion and more pollution. And I think their tactics are, most of the public don't buy it. You know, when you're trying to block a road and then people can't get their kids to school, or someone can't get into emergency to hospital, and people can't get to work, people have got no time for that sort of thing. But they are very, very disruptive. But I am concerned, as more people get concerned about what they're doing, the government start using that for their own means and say, well, okay, yeah, if you want to basically stop protests, well, we've got that legislation in place now. And that in itself is, again, something that shouldn't happen in a liberal country. People have the right to protest, but if they're being disruptive and to the point that they're being almost criminal, then the police should have the right to step in. But we should be allowed both elements within a protest society. Don't stop the protest, but there's consequences when they go too far in terms of the law.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at those pictures now. I mean, where the hell are the police? These people just proceed with impunity. Yeah. It's ridiculous. James, fantastic to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for your time.